Hayao Miyazaki's 2001 film Spirited Away is to this day the highest grossing film in Japanese history. Not only that, but 4 of the top 11 highest grossing films were made by Studio Ghibli, where Hayao Miyazaki works as a director. Or at least he used to. Is he retired? I don't know. Needless to say, Japan has their own animation empire, similar to how the United States has Walt Disney Animation, and Spirited Away is the head of the flurry of animated features that dominate the box office there. Considering the film's impact on young Japanese audiences, I'd like to judge what the film attempts to teach its audience to discern the implications of what said messages might be. I feel the film explicitly attempts to teach its audience what it's like to become an adult, and I'll be referencing the train sea as a key turning point for Chihiro's path to adulthood. Chihiro's growth from insecure child to independent person is apparent in this movie. That said, I feel that No-Face's flip from a monstrous, selfish being to a docile ally of Chihiro is a key element to her growth, and I feel that No-Face's character represents the negative possibilities and growing pains that come with maturing. Spirited Away is, at its core, a coming-of-age story about a young, dependent, and helpless little girl being thrust into adulthood and learning to adapt until she becomes mature and independent. This narrative can be confirmed largely by how the story is structured. The story structure of most movies would dictate that Chihiro would find herself in a new or an uncomfortable situation, and that after several failed attempts to acclimate, she'd eventually undertake part of a larger story going on within her new world. She'd also be forced to grow in order to stop an incoming threat to the world that she has been slowly acclimating to. At the very least, this is what a typical coming-of-age story would outline if it features a character adapting to a new world. This story structure can be seen in other movies like you see. Karate Kid follows a similar structure. A young, helpless kid finds himself in an unfamiliar setting, struggles mightily at first, forced to adapt rapidly to confront a greater evil, in this case Cobra Kai, and while the basic structure is not going to be ironclad from movie to movie, it's a really good entry point to see what kind of movie Spirited Away was trying to be. This movie clearly goes out of its way to establish early on the fact that Chihiro fears moving away from her home and that she's scared of unfamiliar places and new adventures in general. At the beginning of the movie, we can see in one of the film's visual cues that Chihiro is highly dependent on her mom. At the start of the movie, when Chihiro grabs onto her mom's arms, that tells us visually that Chihiro is dependent on her authority figures. They make her feel more comfortable. It's worth noting here that not only is the spirit world unfamiliar to Chihiro, but the rules that she's first to learn there deal explicitly with the themes of living an adult life. She becomes a laborer, she works for a low wage, she negotiates with her superiors, she serves clients to earn her spot in a bed at night. It's undoubtedly a labor-intensive life. It's the kind of adult life that many children are aware of, but that they fear will never become their reality. Naturally, Chihiro struggles to follow the rules of the spirit world at first. She messes up orders at the bathhouse she works at, she nearly ruins Kamaji's system of burning coal, and she upsets Yubaba, her boss, who runs the bathhouse where the story takes place. A greater evil emerges as the plot unveils the fact that Yubaba has been using evil magic to force Haku, Chihiro's closest friend, to work with her, and Chihiro, in an act of bravery, frees Haku of Yubaba's curse and returns an item that was stolen from her good-spirited sister, Zeniba. After doing so, she frees her parents, passes one last trial, and returns home. She's still 10, but she's undoubtedly stronger at this point, right? The classic coming-of-age formula is really present in this film, and it indicates that Studio Ghibli is really aware of the fact that this movie is meant to portray the adventure of becoming an adult to a young, impressionable Japanese audience. So let's get to No-Face. No-Face is, at first glance, perplexing, to say the least. Unlike the other spirits at the bathhouse, No-Face is quiet, he's reserved. Most importantly, No-Face is incredibly impressionable. Most of the spirits in the bathhouse are greedy, and they desire gold above anything else. No-Face, however, tries to give as much gold as he can, at least at first. According to James W. Boyd's essay on Shinto perspectives in Miyazaki's anime film Spirited Away, he says, and I quote, "Just as aspects of nature can become polluted, a river can become dirty and foul-smelling. So also the interior conditions of the human heart and mind can lack a sense of freshness and vitality." This perspective on human nature points directly to No-Face and its crisis on good versus evil. No-Face, much like Chihiro, is trapped between two worlds. No-Face's reactions to the good, Zeniba, and the bad, Yubaba, and I quote him again here, reflect a Shinto ethical outlook that views events in one's life as either reducing, polluting, or promoting, purifying, one's ability to participate fully in the life energy that permeates all of great nature. While Chihiro doesn't explicitly react in the same way that No-Face does, they do experience the same events. In my opinion, No-Face is likely a representation of Chihiro's fear of growing up. Chihiro, in order to remain a relatable protagonist to us, cannot become greedy when surrounded by greed, and she can't become completely docile when in the loving home of Zeniba, and yet Chihiro is still required to accept the consequences of No-Face's actions. Chihiro has seen her parents succumb to greed and succumb to gluttony, and rightfully she fears growing up with her parents' same faults. And if you look at it, No-Face embodies that fear in every single way. After he's invited into the bathhouse, which is full of spirits that would kill for just a single gold nugget, No-Face becomes obsessed with eating everything and anything to satiate its appetite. The greed bleeds into who the character is. And Chihiro doesn't think of herself as a monster, but at this point in the film, I don't think she's gained the confidence to convince herself that she can steer herself off of a path that will lead to her being as greedy as No-Face and subsequently her parents. Looking at No-Face's design, there's also a lot of visual hints that he might be directly linked to Chihiro as a character. His design is blatantly based off of no masks, the Japanese masks used for religious purposes and theatrical performances. There are a lot of different types of these masks, but No-Face looks most similar to the Onna mask, which is used theatrically to represent a woman character. No masks are especially fitting for a character with identity issues like No-Face, because the way the masks are designed is they're meant to keep emotions ambiguous. Instead of expressing emotions with your face, when you're wearing the no masks, they ask you to express emotions with your body movements and your slight head movements. This parallel enforces the idea that No-Face is always capable of taking on different states of mind. He can be greedy, he can be selfish, he can be caring, and he can be kind. If we accept No-Face as an extension of Chihiro's fears of adulthood, then we can accept that any instance in which Chihiro overcomes a major hurdle towards maturity must also include No-Face. His dynamic change from toxic to docile parallels Chihiro's change from dependent to independent, and it even further reflects her change in mindset, from panicked and worried to calm and collected like she is at the end of the film. It only makes sense, then, that No-Face would be present during Chihiro's biggest shift in character in the film, the train ride. When Chihiro leaves to visit Zeniba and learn her final lesson before saving her parents, she does so by taking a train. This train appears to be incredibly significant and an explicit symbol of her transition from a powerless, dependent character to a confident, independent one. It's significant that Chihiro received the train tickets from Kamaji, her first employer, because it demonstrates the contrast from their first encounter. Chihiro now has gained his trust, and through being a responsible worker and a responsible adult, Kamaji concludes that she has earned the train tickets that he specifically states are extremely hard to come by. He also states that the train is no longer a two-way train. He says, very specifically, that this train used to be a two-way train, but now it only takes you to your desired destination without offering a way back. As far as the plot is concerned, this detail is kind of arbitrary. But as we consider the train ride to be a symbol of Chihiro's official transformation from dependent to independent, this arbitrary detail becomes really important, as if it's trying to warn Chihiro that the path to adulthood, the path to what she is taking, is a one-way train. Once she grows up, it cannot be undone. The visual imagery during the train ride itself is incredibly telling, especially considering that the train ride is a 2-minute sequence with zero dialogue, and a cartoon. Devoting such a significant amount of time to silence leaves a sequence teeming with visual significance. The train is filled with inhabitants. Most of the spirits that live in the world of Spirited Away appear as unique and colorful creatures, animal-like creatures, humanoid spirits. The spirits on the train wear business attire, a suit and a hat, and they have black, shadowy bodies, kind of like No-Faces. They are likely a representation of the monotony of adulthood. They are blank-faced, lifeless. Even the suitcases they own turn into shadowy darkness as soon as they touch them. Despite not having faces, the business spirits still have personality. Their body language reads as hunched, tired, and honestly kind of depressed. It's also noteworthy that the train drives away from a faceless young girl, as if to say that she's not old enough to be on the train, and that she could be anybody. If we accept that No-Face represents Chihiro's fears of becoming an adult, then it makes sense that all these working drones on the train would look similar to it, with the exception of No-Face's signature Onna mask. They are all representations of a lifeless, unfulfilling adulthood. No-Face's body represents that. His mask represents Chihiro, the Onna mask, the girl. No-Face's very anatomy is symbolic of her parents and the bathhouse workers that Chihiro is scared to inadvertently emulate as she grows up. That said, Chihiro doesn't succumb to her fears, and instead she sits with them and she controls them, literally. She forces No-Face to sit with her and wait for the train to get to Zeniba's. Her total silence is indicative of the idea that while she's not completely rejecting the ghosts of adulthood around her, she's not necessarily embracing them either. For her, they're more like an afterthought because there are more pressing issues at hand. Another significant juxtaposition used here is the fact that at this point in the story, Chihiro is 100% fully comfortable in the spirit world. A lot like how she was fully comfortable in the human world before. The train moves past a small home on an island with some clothes hanging outside, which could represent her home in the human world, but then the train passes through a bustling city, which represents her new home, the hectic spirit world, but also the new and intimidating city that she was on her way to move into at the beginning of the film. Regardless, the two locations reflect the fact that in the human world, Chihiro is moving from her comfortable, isolated home to a large, intimidating city. The train attempts to force her out of her comfort zone even further by taking Chihiro away from both her original and her new home to a new unknown, and her composure while confronting the new unknown proves that she is now capable of taking on new challenges, a skill that she lacked at the start of the film. Chihiro's journey to maturity, and Studio Ghibli is certainly aware of this, teaches its young audience about what the process of maturing is like, and it teaches how a young audience should approach maturing properly. Hayao Miyazaki, having a huge voice of influence almost comparable to Walt Disney's, goes out of his way to teach his audience, which is specifically targeted at young girls, that maturing is a complex, imperfect, and often a messy process. No-Face is evidence that the time children spend learning how to grow up is always well spent because a child's mind is constantly learning from both everything it encounters, good, bad, and otherwise. As a heroine, Chihiro makes plenty of mistakes, and she teaches the children watching that independence, not dependence on a parent or significant other, is the key to growing up. While it's worth noting that the movie gives Chihiro a romantic interest in Haku, the film denies them of any semblance of a typical happy ending that ensures Chihiro's growth reflects on the fact that she works within the plot to save him and not the other way around. Many films depict young female protagonists as gentle and helpless and virginal. And while Chihiro is definitely gentle and definitely kind, sometimes, the film never implies that those features are always coupled with people that are beautiful and idealistic, right? Instead, it implies that being gentle and kind are necessary traits to have if one wants to be mature and interact positively with others, which is generally true. That said, Chihiro shows us that she's capable of being stern and rigid with No-Face when it attacks the bathhouse and confronts her. Spirited Away undoubtedly goes out of its way to show us that young girls can act with agency, and that they can fight against their own fears, and that they can conquer them. No-Face's inability to act consistently good or consistently bad is incredibly consistent with the act of growing up, nothing else. While saying that No-Face is an extension of Chihiro's fear isn't a super explicit message in the film, the fears that Chihiro does have are likely incredibly relatable to a young audience and are undoubtedly what drive the relatability of Chihiro home. Growing up's often a horribly chaotic process. No one is good at it on their first try, and you only get one try. Chihiro's extreme ups and downs show the children watching that not only is it alright to not be great at growing up, but that it's normal and honestly even expected for people to struggle with it. At least at first.